Hello, my name is Jenny McFarland. I work at the Tucson Audubon Society as bird conservation biologist, and I'm also one of the co-coordinators of the Arizona Important Bird Areas program. And I want to share with you a little bit of how we use sound recorders to do our work for various bird surveys within Southeast Arizona. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a short presentation. Okay, go. Uh, so the Arizona Important Bird Areas program is a large collaboration of a lot of different partners. It is an international program with a lot of programs throughout different, like over 170 countries throughout the world. And in the United States, it's run by the Audubon Society. And within Arizona, it is run by the Tucson Audubon Society and Audubon Southwest of the National Audubon Society. We have a great partnership with Arizona Game and Fish, as well as through their APSI initiative, the Arizona Bird Conservation Initiative. So the Arizona IBA program uses a lot of volunteers all over the state to do bird surveys. And these volunteers are trained, we do workshops, but we've also started to use sound recorders in our bird survey work. So this all began for us when we were doing yellow-billed cuckoo surveys, where we have been doing yellow-billed cuckoo surveys for many years in various locations around Southeast Arizona. But in 2014, Western yellow-billed cuckoo was listed on the Endangered Species Act as a threatened distinct population segment. So as a result, some of the work we'd been doing having to do with habitat and surveys throughout the riparian zones of Southeast Arizona suddenly became very relevant because this bird was now listed. So we got a contract with the Coronado National Forest to do surveys from 2015 to 2019 within the Coronado. And these are some of the locations where we put sound recorders. So you can see the blue stars, and these are various mountain ranges, sky islands of Southeast Arizona, where we had laid out routes to do surveys in partnership with the Coronado National Forest, because they needed to know if there was yellow-billed cuckoos within their management area, basically. So we had laid out and did traditional callback surveys, which we were permitted to do. We had done them before. We had enough experience from before the bird was listed that we could do regular callback surveys. But we also, because Coronado had purchased some wildlife acoustic sound recorders, which I had never used this technology before 2015, they loaned us some of their recorders and wanted us to put them on the survey routes. So we sort of chose really good habitat patches within the center of these approximately 1 to 2 kilometer long routes. We installed, here's a photo of me with one of the recorders we put up in one of the Sky Island routes. And we had them running all summer. So you do 4 visits. So all 8 weeks, we had these recorders running. We swapped out batteries every time we did an in-person callback survey. And cuckoos work really well for this since they do call quite a lot, especially in the early hours of the morning, and they sound like this. It's a loud, strident call. They do sort of give it extemporaneously. They sort of give it whenever they give it periodically, and it does carry quite well. So this actually worked amazingly well. We had some help from someone who knew how to use the software to help us analyze the data and see what the recorders picked up, looking for, with the Kaleidoscope software from Wildlife Acoustics, looking for cuckoo sounds. And it worked really well. We got really similar results. So this is a map showing our positive detections from our in-person surveys that we did using callback and sort of just in person listening for the birds to respond. Now, the audio recorders, of course, are passive devices, just listening for the birds to call extemporaneously, but it did have very similar results. So then I was really convinced on this technology, on how well it worked. So from then on, I was totally amazed by this technology. And then we at Tucson Audubon went ahead and got some grant funding and purchased some of our own devices. And one of the most significant species I've used them on for the Arizona Important Bird Areas program is the chestnut-collared longspur. This is a really cool bird. They're related to snow buntings. They look a bit like sparrows, but they're not. They're not related really that closely to sparrows, but they hang out in the grasslands. And we get them in Southeast Arizona as a wintering bird. We don't really get them at all in the spring or summer. They nest much further north, like in the tall grass prairie. area, like in the Dakotas, Idaho, Montana, parts of Canada. They're very much a tallgrass prairie bird, but they do winter down in southeast Arizona, parts of New Mexico, Texas, and in northern Mexico in Chihuahuan desert grassland, which is a really vulnerable habitat type. They're a really high priority bird for the areas for the global important bird area program. They're so also therefore for the Arizona important bird area program, very, very high priority species. They are in the IUCN, the international ranking list. They are listed, they're on the red list as vulnerable, which is a very, serious ranking for a species globally. So in Southeast Arizona here for the Arizona Important Bird Areas program, we do with lots of volunteers, we do two winter surveys, and we've done them for years, since about 2011. We've done these surveys in San Rafael grasslands near Patagonia, as well as the Las Ciénegas grasslands near Sonoita. And for years, we've done these surveys, sort of almost like a census, driving around looking for them in the habitat. They are pretty distinctive sounding, and not so much looking, but sounding, and their behavior is incredibly distinctive. And these are actual photos of what they look like in the winter. They're much more colorful in the spring and summer, but that's not how we see them here in Southeast Arizona in their winter plumage. But a few years back, we started to realize that the tanks, and by tanks, I mean like ponds, like cattle ponds or cattle tanks in Southeast Arizona, were a really important resource for these birds. They eat a lot of seeds. That's primarily what they eat in the winter, is the seeds of native grasses. So it's really important for them to have access to water that they can drink throughout the day. So we started to realize that these cattle ponds out in these grasslands were a really important resource for these birds. We also added a grass component to our surveys a few years back, where we identify as much as we can the presence of the non-native layman's love grass and the presence of native grasses, since it's a really important factor for them, because the layman's is just, which is sort of outcrowding the native grasses as an invasive species, is really poor food for them compared to their favored native grasses. This is what they sound like. They make these little squeaky flock sounds. In the winter, turn that off. In the winter, they're very flockish. They hang out in these big flocks. They come in as a group, often to these ponds to drink water. And they like this photo shows here in the bottom center, they'll kind of land on the edge of the ponds and get a drink. They do it pretty frequently throughout the day, and they do it as a group, and they are very noisy when they come in as a group, which makes it a really good bird for a sound recorder study in this situation, because they do come in quite with distinctive sounds, and they consistently call while they're coming in as a flock to these ponds. So we set up recorders at various ponds. We did, by then we had purchased our own recorders. So we used some of our SM4 recorders, and we got later with a different grant, got some more of the Wildlife Acoustics Song mini recorders and put them out in partnership with the Bureau of Land Management. We did get a permit to do this at Las Ciénegas. And we put the recorders at different tanks to see if we could figure out which tanks were their favorites. And we did this with a conservation purpose in mind. We wanted to know which tanks they preferred. And the photo here is one of their favorite tanks in Las Ciénegas, as it turns out from the recorders, as well as sort of ground truthing. But the birds are really skittish, and I was concerned that sometimes having people standing near the tanks could change their behavior, and maybe they wouldn't come in as much, or we might not realize they were using certain tanks, because with people standing there, sometimes they won't come in. But the recorders really helped us figure out which tanks were their favorites, and then we could assess these tanks, and we did do a whole process of assessing the physical qualities of these tanks to see sort of how steep the slopes were of the edges. That turned out to be, I think, a really important factor, because you can see in this bottom center photo, the birds kind of land on the edge, and they're small. They're like sparrow-sized birds. They'll sit on the edge of the dirt there, and sort of, it needs to be kind of, ankle deep to them, and they lean over and get a little drink. So this really helped us learn the properties of the tanks that they really favor, which then led us to a partnership. So this is us using the Kaleidoscope software and turning their positive detections at the various tanks into data. So we could tell, so here's the spreadsheet we did from a tank showing sort of the dates and the times, the time frames, the 1 hour time frames that the Longspur flocks, it could be various flocks, could be multiple flocks, were detected though coming into a specific tank. So for a presence absence kind of bird study, this works really well. So we were able to figure out which tanks they really liked, and then we went ahead and did some work with the University of Arizona, We got did a whole write-up with them for their CART, a science community tool for restoration, and we did a CART profile on this situation of what we learned about the tanks and the grasslands, and we did a whole write-up about what we found to be the most the most relevant sort of factors of the tanks. The fact that they needed water to be clear, they cannot have a lot of vegetation around the tanks, like in terms of shrubs and trees. They really need it as open as possible, kind of like this photo showing here, that one of their favorite tanks, and the water being sort of clean and clear as possible, and having certainly some slopes around the tank that are gentle enough, not like a steep drop off for a bird their size, but having some edges that were shallow enough that they could walk up to the water and drink effectively. So then we had some sort of next steps in this tool as part of the sort of grassland toolbox. And that was really great that we were able to use sound recorders to do a whole study that led to some really nice sort of land, but best management practices and conservation outcomes for this bird that was is really one of the fastest declining species in North America, is the chestnut-collared longspur. So hope that was a really brief talk. I'm the name on the right. I'm Jenny McFarland with the Tucson Audubon Society. I do co-coordinate the Arizona IBA program with Tice Saplee at Audubon Southwest. And here's our contact information. Thank you so much.